Further.
Okay.
Awesome. Will, thanks a million. First, thanking obviously the university for creating this great space where we can have this very important conversation during an important time. Thanking Edible Education. I think it's timely for there to be a curriculum around edible education. Something I've been a chef for over 37 years and worked on my grandfather's farm before that. So my whole life's been about food. I think it's the most important thing in the world. And now other people are learning that maybe I'm not completely wrong with that. And a super special thanks, Will, to you, for leading, edible education, but just for all of the amazing things that you've done in proving that you can make money and you can make good things happen at the same time, and that's something that's incredible. When we can actually look at the economic power that exists in the everyday life of people, and we can conduct our businesses in a way that takes care of them, takes care of our planet, takes care of us and our family, but actually creates real meaningful change, that's a good thing. So thank you for your entire body of work, Will. What I'll do real quick is just kind of go through, give you a little bit of context and background, who I am, why I do what I do, a little bit of the history, how that led to the founding of Wholesome Wave, a little bit about my career as a chef, talk about some pretty interesting and powerful notions that we've discovered around our work, why I think it's kind of like the perfect time in this kind of wacky environment, policy environment we're living in today. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. We have a sheet, I think, of some questions that folks sent in, so I'll get to a couple of those as well. And without further ado, unless you have any questions or comments, I'll just get started. Is that cool? Everybody good? Awesome. Okay, so my mom was one of 13 children on a farm in southeastern Missouri. My dad was one of 12 children on a farm in western Kentucky. I spent my childhood going to my grandfather's farm in southeastern Missouri, working it because he couldn't afford farm workers anymore. Me, my brother, all my cousins. We'd spend 6 weeks every summer learning how to raise animals, butcher animals, raise fruits and vegetables, raise corn, harvest the stuff, drive compost piles, tend soil health, cook, can, pickle, cure, everything. By age 12, I could cook collard greens, black-eyed peas blindfolded by age 12. I could cook, I could salt, I could cure, I could pickle, I could can, I could do all those things. I just thought it was normal. But when my parents fell on hard times when I was 18 years old in high school, me and my older brother had to move out of the house because they had to downsize. And my mom said, Michel, you're going to be okay, because you can cook, so at least you'll eat, get a job in a restaurant. So in 1978, I started as a breakfast cook in a truck stop on the Illinois-Wisconsin border, Center's Truck Stop, still there today. You can go visit it. But the interesting thing was, as I started working rapidly through the restaurant business, back in the late 70s and early 80s, all the chefs were from Europe, and no young American white people could cook. So I was an anomaly. So I really moved rapidly through the system. A chef would say to me when they saw the way that I could work with animals or the way that I could cure and pickle and can and braise and do all these different things that other Americans couldn't, they'd say, I want you to be my sous chef. And I would say, what's that? And they'd say, oh, it's $5 more an hour. And I'd say, I'm in. So, within 3 short years, I went from a breakfast cook at a truck stop to the chef of a French restaurant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called the Fleur de Lis, in 3 years. No culinary school. But in that 3-year journey was this really bizarre anomaly. Here I am working with these Alsatian, French, German chefs who are showing me culinary techniques that none of my aunts and uncles and my mother didn't know. Really miraculous stuff. Like pure clarity stocks reducing to a glass. And then your ability to mount in different types of fats and build and layer flavors. But they were perfectly happy with perfectly round pink tomatoes coming in the back door of the restaurant saying, that's a good tomato. Because they're all the same size and they were listless, they didn't taste good. So I said to myself, wow, I can actually outcook some of these guys. I'm going to become a chef. And then I'm going to outcompete everybody because I'll just go out into the countryside, find farmers, and buy from them. I'll have the type of food that my grandfather raised me on, and I'll have the best restaurant in the Midwest. And then disappointment set in. I made dozens of visits to farms, knocking on doors and having doors slammed in my face. I made dozens of phone calls. I thought I would be able to find even the wheat, the oat, the corn, the soy growers, which is mostly what was in central Wisconsin at the time, that they would have a family vegetable plot like my grandfather did. 3 acres, so we could do all the canning and pickling and take a U-Haul trailer back in payment for our free services every summer. Nobody had a family vegetable plot. So I offered money in advance to have people grow stuff for me. I was working really, really hard, only to learn that the way that I was raised became extinct, just like my grandfather's farmhouse did. You know, that was the detritus in the food system. And it really forced me into my first experience with advocacy. Because the way that I was raised that I thought was normal was something that had fast become nearly extinct. How could I let that happen? How could I not know that that was going on? And now that I knew that, how could I ever let that stand? So I persevered. Paid people in advance for food. The first year I paid out $4,800 in advance to farmers to have them grow stuff for me so I could make a plate like this, you know. Where do you get a good carrot? Where do you get a good tomato? How do you get a good eggplant? You pay somebody in advance. And guess what? We had to go pick the stuff. I'm like, so I'll pay you now, and then I'll pay you the rest when you deliver it to me. They're like, deliver? I'm not gonna deliver food. I'm a farmer, man. I don't deliver stuff. So we picked it up. We went from dozens of calls, though. I mean, I remember all of the phone calls that I made and the visits I made. In the first year, I think I was lucky if 5% of everything in my cooler came from a local producer. Lucky. Maybe 2%. I wasn't measuring. All I knew is that there's like a little corner in my cooler where I could put the stuff that I was getting from the couple of local farmers that I convinced, and the rest of it came from Cisco. But today, I can make like a handful of phone calls and have 100% of everything in my restaurant come from a local producer. Farm to table has become kind of a normal thing for many, but oddly, it's a boutique movement. It's very small. So it raises a couple of questions. One question is this, okay, if only upscale and high concept restaurants can afford to play in this, and their customers who can afford $20 to $50 for an entree are the ones who can afford this, the whole food shoppers. If everyone can't afford sustainable food, truly sustainable food, then can our food system be truly sustainable? That's a key question. Another question, can just farmers markets make a difference? If we tripled the 8,800 farmers markets that we have today, would it make a meaningful difference in a country that has close to 750 million acres of land in conventional agricultural production? And if all the current boutique restaurant concepts that feed the lucky 5% went farm to table tomorrow, the ones that aren't, would that make a difference when fast, casual, high concept restaurants and white tablecloth restaurants only make up 1.5% of the entire food service industry? So, big target when we talk about changing our food system, and just a couple of boutique movements where that dream is becoming a small, what I call a micro reality. But then we have 64 million Americans who are low income. So that's the 44 billion people that rely on SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps. But there's another 21 to 23 million, depending on the year, that are food insecure. They have trouble putting food on the table at all tonight, let alone any good food. That's happening right now. Definitely aren't eating in any of the restaurants that I mentioned, let alone being able to afford the basic ingredients to put a healthy meal on the table. But because it represents 20% of the American population, I think it's an interesting sector to look at when we talk about how do we get large amounts of people to actually buy into participating in a changed food system. And I think to do that, we have to look at what they're spending on food, right? So Will mentioned it earlier, it's on our website, $70 billion in SNAP, another $63 billion in the money, $133 billion on retail food. Now, let me help you understand just how big that market is. In 2012, the last data that's available from Walmart, 55% of their sales, or $244 billion, was groceries in 1 year. Global annual grocery sales. That's more than half of Walmart's global annual grocery sales. Just underserved consumers. That's a big marketplace. It's massive. It's massive. Could it be that there's an opportunity here? I think there is. It's a lot of money. But to really understand the opportunity, we have to look at what everybody's eating, and this is kind of like the deal. Carbohydrates and condensed soup. And in fact, you can take, many of you might actually do this, right? You cook the ramen noodles, you soften them up, and instead of putting that lousy seasoning packet in there, you pour the water off and you stir in a can of cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup, cream of celery soup, tomato soup, whatever it might be, and a very popular recipe in a food desert community, underserved urban or rural community, is minute rice with cream and mushroom soup. Poor man's risotto. Fills you up. Those two, a box of that and a can of that, feeds 4 to 6 people depending on their size for like pennies, right? That's kind of like the deal. So then we have to ask a few more questions, right? And I'm going to kind of ask you guys the questions. Why is it that this is the only thing that's on the dinner table? How many people think it's because healthier food options aren't available where all this other stuff is in these neighborhoods, that it's a lack of access? Okay, lack of access, right? That's a word that you hear a lot, right? Food access. Lack of education. Maybe it's because even if people found, broccoli to cut into florets and peel the stems and cut it into cubes and add it to one of these meals, that not enough people actually understand what the healthy food choice is, or if they encounter it, they don't know how to cook it. They don't know how to prepare it. Lack of education, right? Okay? Yep. Okay. Culture. Surely there's a cultural context. If you're from Cambodia, you love bitter gourd and fuzzy melon. If you're from Tennessee, you love collard greens and black-eyed peas. If you're from Maine, you love chowder, right? But, sometimes it's, people will actually go to a grocery store, especially in an underserved community, whether it's urban or rural, and it's kind of like bananas and really bad romaine lettuce. There's not something there that they understand or like. How many people think that there's a cultural component, that that culture might be the barrier? So access is a barrier, education is a barrier, cultural context is a barrier. To understand the true answer, I think we need to understand really first the resources that consumers struggling with poverty have in the context of what it costs to put a healthy meal on the table. And I think that's what we got to do. So let's look at this. That's a healthy meal, okay? You got a chicken breast, you got a wedge of lime, you got some sweet potatoes, some quinoa, some lettuce. That looks pretty good, right? So, many believe that this inexpensive meal should be easy for a family struggling with poverty to put on the table. It's not that much, but lack of access, if you don't have access to the sweet potatoes and the lettuce, take that off the plate, right? There you go, right? Cultural difference. If you don't like sweet potatoes, are sweet potatoes going to make it on the point, right? Lack of education. What do you do if you like sweet potato but you don't know how to cook it? Is it going to end up on the plate? So lack of education kind of leads to, well, let's just go to the fast food restaurant and get a value meal, right? $5, burger, fries, and a Coke, right? But what about cost? This plate costs $3.56, which is 6 cents more than a SNAP shopper gets to spend on food per person for the entire day. So, if you go out and buy all that stuff from scratch and you cook it and put it on the table tonight, You just took all the money you have for food today and put it into that meal. So you get one meal a day if you want to eat that well. So that is a big deal. So the truth is, here's what's for dinner. When you look at Easy Mac, 88 cents, multiply that 3 times, and you're actually saving a little bit of money, but you're getting 3 plates of something on the table for your family today. So I suggest that the only true barrier when it comes to underserved consumers making a healthier food choice is lack of affordability. We have seen in our work with Wholesome Wave that if you make affordability happen in the South Bronx, people from Harlem take 2 or 3 bus transfers to get to it. So, yep, access is a challenge, but it's not a barrier if the affordability is there. And one of the questions, I'm just going to read ahead. There's Katz did an article in the New York Times that said, putting grocery stores in underserved communities in food deserts does not result in healthier food choices. And my answer to that was, duh. If you put a Mercedes-Benz dealership in Notasulga, Alabama, and spend $10 million marketing why a Mercedes is better than a used pickup truck, after 5 years, you're not going to sell a single car because all the people in rural Alabama, where my brother lives, can afford our used pickup truck. They know the Mercedes is better, safer, safer for their family, airbags, ABS brake systems, crumple zones, all that stuff. They're not buying that car. They know it's better. Just like more underserved consumers know that fruits and vegetables is something they should be eating every day, they know it. If they can't afford it, they're not going to buy it. So when it actually gets to a bedrock American value of right of choice, do you truly have the right to choose to feed your family better if you can't afford to make the purchase? So that's an important question. So I think affordability is the barrier. But let's talk about cost opportunity. We talked a little bit about what happens if we shift the $133 billion to more sustainable food, to local healthy food, what that could do to the food system. In 2007, diet-related disease cost America this much money, $800 billion. I don't know if you guys have seen the Austin Power thing, or that's so old school now, It's like, Will and I are kind of like, oh, a new movie, That's like, think about that for a second. These are all diet-related, diet-preventable diseases. In 2015, it jumped to $1.4 trillion. $1.4 trillion. That's a lot. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was at an AgriPulse meeting with a whole bunch of conventional farm people. It was like big ag, other folks around the energy of what's the future look like when we don't have a cabinet yet that has all the appointees for Department of Agriculture. Mike Conway of Texas, from the Austin District, Republican, he's the chair of the House Ag Committee, got up and delivered this eloquent, emotional, beautiful, heart-wrenching talk about how he was struggling and then has decided that he would not stand in the way of eliminating the McGovern-Dole World Hunger Act at $1.7 billion a year. That as a young senator, he visited Africa, he visited Madagascar, he saw the program in place, he saw the happiness and the joy that it created amongst famine-stricken populations. He saw the American flag on the bags of food. He is vested in this program, but has decided, perhaps rightly in his mind, that the $12 trillion debt that he would be leaving his grandchildren cannot stand. And that is a lot of money, $12 trillion. But if we talk about it in the context of impact, get your calculator out and divide $1.7 billion against $19 trillion. You'll find that it's it's 1/1000th of the bill. So what that means is we have to chase 1,000 things at 1.7 billion to actually have an impact on the $19 trillion in debt. That's 1.4 trillion. That's 5%. We only have to find 20 of those. So when people talk about fiscal conservatism, fiscal responsibility, you have to ask them the question, is it really efficient, effective use of my tax dollars for you to chase 1,000 things to cut at $1.7 billion? Or do that for 20 years? You know, and because in reducing healthcare costs, you actually get the bang for the buck immediately, it might only take like 8 years to actually eat our way out of the national debt. Wouldn't that be delicious, right? That's a good line, isn't it? You can use that. Yeah, write it down. So anyway, you know, when we look at this paradigm, it kind of begs the question, right? Imagine if underserved consumers could take their $133 billion, all of it, and spend it on healthier food choices, right? Would it take a chip out of that 1.4 trillion? The answer is yes. So I'll give you, for context, I'll give you one example. And I know a lot about this because 2 of my 5 children have type 1 diabetes. It's how I learned about type 2 diabetes, which is preventable through food, reversible in the early stages through food. It's this amazing opportunity, but tens of millions of Americans who struggle with prediabetes or type 2 itself don't have an income that allows them to buy the food to avoid it. Dialysis for one person is $96,000 a year. For $96,000, everybody in this, if we had 250 people in this room, $96,000 increases fruit and vegetable consumption for 250 people, 2 servings a day for an entire year. Increasing your fruit and vegetable consumption 2 servings a day gives you a 21% chance of avoiding type 2 diabetes. So if you look at the 50 people that don't get type 2 diabetes, 40% of whom would end up on dialysis, $96,000 in food saves $5.8 million in dialysis. 96,000 divided by 5.8 million. So yeah, 133 billion spent on healthier food could help us eat our way out of that deficit. Now, this could be a new reality, but only if the demand exists, because so we've talked about the economic opportunity, what happens if we shift 130 billion, what happens if we target that 1.4 trillion, right? You know, we can eat our way out of the national debt. Could be a reality, but the only thing that's going to drive 64 million consumers to make that change is if they actually want to do it. That's the most important question of all, right? Is there consumer market demand? So, founded Wholesome Wave in 2007 to act on this opportunity by exploring if there was hidden consumer demand in communities struggling with poverty to make the healthier food choice. We started with the assumption that demand exists, but affordability was the barrier. We wanted to believe that that was true, but we were open to it not being true. So we had to do 2 things. First, we had to level the price playing field. There was no talk about, we couldn't go to the government and say, hey, can we take these subsidies that make the rice and the noodles and stuff so artificially cheap and take that money and put it into fruits and vegetables to make it cheaper? We couldn't do that. So we basically created a 2-for-1 fruit and vegetable sale using wooden nickels, right? High tech. We actually call that MVP, man, minimally viable product approach, okay? And, we raised private money so that we could double food stamp benefits when spent on locally grown fruits and vegetables at farmers markets and participating retailers. And here's what we learned. Well, first, before I do the reveal, there were people that were like bugging us, donors who wanted to throw money at us if we would study health outcomes. And we kind of refuse to do it because we have to remember the question, does demand exist? And when you're surveying consumer attitudes around a 2-for-1 sale, and then you ask somebody to come over and roll up their sleeve and give blood, it changes their consumer attitude. So we didn't study any health outcomes. We studied the attitudes, and look at this. 3 years in a row, qualitative studies, More people every year. The third year, over 3,600 SNAP consumers, different people every year. While the number of shoppers increased, the things that were important stayed the same every frickin' year. 95% of people felt it was important or very important that the quality of the produce was good for participating in the program. 88% supporting local farmers and businesses. That tied with accepting the benefit in the first place. Accepting the benefit's an important reason to participate in the program, that the market accepts it, right? And then selection of produce. It reads like a frickin' Whole Foods survey. Now, it did not surprise me when Walmart made their pledge to the Partnership for a Healthier America, saying by 2015, 15% of all of our fresh food will come from within the state where our stores are at. And now they recently doubled down. They made 18%. Now they're saying we're doubling our local footprint. They have the largest organic section of any retail grocer in the United States for the footprint of the organic section in context to the rest of the grocery offerings. Now, anybody ever been to a Walmart? Anybody? I have. I get my fishing license there, okay? You ever notice the yuppie aisle? No. There ain't one. They don't niche market. They're not aiming at Whole Food shoppers. Whole Food shopper wouldn't get caught dead shopping in a Walmart. But they accept 20% of all food stamp sales plus that extra consumer dollar every year. It's over $30 billion in sales for them. More than 10% of all their groceries. They're going local because it's important to all their customers. They've gone organic because it's important to all their customers. So I wasn't surprised because we knew that people, whether they were Cambodian, Laotian, Somali, African American, Hispanic American, and whether they were in Appalachia, Notasulga, Alabama, Inglewood on the west side of Chicago, or City Heights, South San Diego, that people know they should be feeding their families better food. They want to feed them better food, but affordability is the barrier. So once we proved that demand, we had to figure out how to talk about it, which I think was important for those who believed in Congress that education was the opportunity. We pulled this stunt. We said, go ahead, spend $10 million, go to Notasulga, Alabama, where my brother lives, and market Dodge Ram trucks. Convince them that the new pickup truck with the multiple side airbags, the ABS brakes, the crash-resistant crumple zones, are death by highway accident at 70 miles an hour in rural Alabama is a very real statistic. Alabama and Texas is one of the biggest death statistics in the country, right? You need one of those, right? You can spend all that money on marketing, and guess what? These guys know that would be the better truck than this, but this is what they can afford, the used pickup truck, right? Gets back to the Mercedes used pickup truck thing. So what we really have to understand is that dinner is the Dodge Ram or the Mercedes of our food system, and here's the used pickup truck of our food system. That's the deal. That's the reality for people struggling with poverty. So here's a short video clip that I'm going to play real quick that I'm not going to play the whole thing.
Does it have sound?
It does have sound. Oh, okay. Oh, high tech, baby. Oh, that's awesome. You're the man. So we founded Wholesome Wave to figure out what are some common sense ways that we can demonstrate that people struggling with poverty really want to feed their families well. They would make better food choices if they could afford it. So we just said, let's create 2-for-1 fruit and vegetable sales. Yeah. So we started raising private money to double the value of food stamps.
So Michel, you've also created this fruit and vegetable prescription program. What's that, mate?
So a patient who's at risk of a diet-related disease goes to a doctor. Doctor said, yep, you're at risk. gives them a prescription, tells them to increase their fruit and vegetable consumption a serving per day, and the whole family participates. So the patient's not in isolation. They go to the farmer's market, exchange the prescription for free fruits and vegetables, eat more fruits and vegetables, then go back monthly to be measured for their health outcomes and their progress, and then they get a refill for their prescription. So doctors who are often frustrated because all they can do is advise a low-income consumer that they should be making healthier food choices can actually give that advice, and then the prescription actually allows that consumer to get the free fresh fruits and vegetables they need. We use exactly the same infrastructure of the prescription system, but we're investing in food in the front end instead of paying for medicine for life because now it's too late.
One of the doctors who signed up to work with Wholesome Wave is Dr. Perasamy at the Harlem Hospital.
Here you are, a doctor at the hospital here in Harlem, writing a prescription saying, go and get some fruits and vegetables.
Initially, all these years, I'm like telling them you have to eat healthy, you have to exercise, you have to lose weight. And then they said, oh, all these years you told me, but I couldn't afford it.
One family that works with Dr. Perasamy is Cheryl and her daughter, Alasia. They've been on the fruit and veggie prescription program for 3 years, and they both couldn't be happier.
Alasia started the program almost 3 years ago, severely asthmatic. She was overweight, a lot of difficulty with breathing.
You were prescribed fruits and vegetables, right?
Yes.
Like it wasn't medicine or prescription drugs. Did that seem weird to you?
Yes, it was. And actually, to me, it was like, I thought, doctors just like to give you medicine. So it was different. It was like, okay, well, this is not medicine. Let's see how this works out.
Now, what was the experience like taking your daughter to the farmer's market?
She actually liked speaking with the farmers. She liked the colors, and some of the things were different from what she was used to. So there were actually purple string beans one year. And she was like, Mommy, how are they purple? And I was like, ask the farmers, they'll tell you. And she talked about how do things grow and how do you know what's fresh. I think learning those things made it more fun for her to eat them. The biggest impact is that her health is way better. Like, she has not used any steroids for her asthma in 3 years.
Wow.
It's kind of cool, right? So here's the thing about Alicia, right? Between the time she started the program and the video was taken, she had lost. Hey, what's happening, buddy? Hey, you thirsty? Here, come here, man. Here you go. Here you go, buddy. All right. All right. Yeah. Affordable access to water, very important. So anyway, Alicia has lost another 40 pounds. And I don't know if you heard Cheryl, but she went off of steroids for her asthma. She's now on a volleyball team in her high school. Her grades have improved dramatically. So, the food is medicine thing really works. We're proving it. We're in 47 states, over 1,400 farmers markets, retailers, clinics, et cetera. Just kind of starting. But when you think about that $133 billion proposition, when you think about the 64 million people, we, Wholesome Wave, with our entire partner network, all of our competitors who are also doing this work are reaching less than 3% of 64 million people. So we're starting to scale our technologies. We're going to change our payment technologies. We're going to really grow our partnerships with major retailers, distribution points, food banks, et cetera. We need to reach 64 million people, because when we can actually go to the federal government, how many people have heard of the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive Program by any chance? You have Market Match here, right, in California. That's the doubling program where you can take your SNAP benefits, your CalFresh benefits to the farmer's market and double them and get the fruit and vegetable incentive. We were successful because of the outcomes that we shared with the government, getting the Food Insecurity Nutrition Incentive Program into the 2014 Farm Bill. $100 million to double SNAP on fruits and vegetables. You can clap if you want, right? But don't clap too hard, because when you divide 100 million against, actually it's 25 million a year for 5 years or 4 years. You divide that 25 million against 66 billion, it's 4/100ths of a percent. So there's a lot to do. So we really need to work on that economic argument of the 1.4 trillion. But the only way we're going to get the type of attention where the Congressional Budget Office and the Office of Management and Budget will actually allow Medicare and Medicaid to be coded so that it can reimburse healthy food purchases, imagine that, is if we can reach 5,000 person in one community and a control group of 5,000 person people in another community. So that's what we're looking at. And in this current climate of political oddness, I do believe there's opportunity. How many people hear the word disruption in their business classes, right? Who's going to come up with the next disruptive idea, right? And how important that is. We're living in the time of great disruption. And I think whenever there's a time of great disruption, there's an incredible amount of opportunity. And almost everybody in the current administration has given a playbook to all of the appointed officials that if you're going to talk about any programs of any kind that are going to be paid for by the federal government, you have to tell us what relationship they're going to have in eliminating that $19 trillion debt. And I think we have the answer. So what if we can shift the way $133 billion gets spent by 64 million people? That's an exciting conversation. If you look at all of these wins that happen, low-income families benefit, public health improves, local communities and taxpayers benefit, agriculture and retail food economies benefit significantly, new jobs get created. Every time you switch a cereal and oilseed crop to fruit and vegetable crops, there's a 3-time economic value in that. There is no GPS-guided eggplant combine. People pick eggplant, people pick tomatoes, people pick zucchini squash. If 64 million Americans increase their consumption of fruits and vegetables 2 servings a day, it would create hundreds of thousands of jobs. And then those are people who wouldn't need SNAP in the first place. Because after all, the root cause of hunger is poverty. The root cause of lack of access to some of these questions that you guys have asked about Wendell's very provocative writings, how can somebody actually engage with understanding that eating is an agricultural act if they can barely get 1 3/4 meals on the table a day for their family, right? So we believe there's an opportunity to organize where underserved consumers and shifting that $133 billion can actually become the heroes of a changed food system. And that's our dream at Wholesome Wave. And now I think I have time to open it up for questions, right? How did I do?